thank you very much, and thank you to the organizers for the invitation. And I just want to welcome those of you who are here visiting Gainesville. I've been here for the first time, or maybe the second time. It's really great to see you, and I hope you have a good experience here. Thank you for bringing nice weather, a little cold, but okay. So, as mentioned, my name is Jonathan Dane, John, and I have a joint appointment between the Center for Latin American Studies and the school with a long name, Forest, Fisheries, and Geomatic Sciences. And today I want to talk to you fairly briefly about something that you all already know. Just raise your hand if you're involved with partnerships or collaboration in the work you do. Is there anybody who doesn't work collaboratively or work with partnerships? Raise your hand if you don't work with partners. Yeah, everybody does. And I'm not going to take the time, because we don't have it, to ask you how it's going. But partnerships are fundamental to change. And if you look up on the screen in relatively small letters, you'll find what this symposium is supposed to be focusing on. So, conveying a systems perspective on social and behavioral change, exploring approaches to influencing food choices and improving nutrition, and identifying leverage points for social behavior, etc. And what I want to talk to you about is what you already know. And I suspect there are people in here who know more about this than I do. I'm going to take us up a little bit level to the idea that we need to be working together, okay, and talk a little bit about that. Not everything that I talk about today is going to be new to you. Not everything is going to be interesting to you. But I hope that something that I touch on this afternoon is going to be either useful or interesting to you, okay? Thank you very much. So, you're talking about systems, food systems. Paul was talking about those different levels, Paul Monahan just a minute ago. It's a really complex world that we work in, that you all work in. Even if you're working in a small village somewhere, that village, as we all know, is integrally connected to all sorts of other levels and scales. And no one person, no one group can possibly have enough information to make any kind of decent decisions about how to even approach a research project. You've got to work together. Okay? So collaboration and partnerships are fundamental for change. And apologies for the little comic here. I really like puns. And if you've never been to the UK or to the US, a gnome, G-O-N-E-M-E, is a little tiny little person that's mischievous and causes trouble. It's just a stupid thing, but if you like math, you'll get it. Okay, so collaboration is pretty fundamental. I want to start out by telling you two quick stories, which I want to use to frame what I'm going to talk about. In 1985, I was a young person, and I was working in rural Paraguay, in the center of Latin America. I'm a Latin Americanist. That's where I work, mostly Brazil, Mexico, other parts of South America. And at the time, I was what we call a Peace Corps volunteer. I was living in a rural village. I was working with cotton and pepper farmers. I was supposed to be helping them with food security, among other things, by teaching them beekeeping as an income project, generate income. Anyway, I was in my second year. I was working with a family that I knew very well in a little town called Huguaçu, which means big hole. And we had been working their bees all morning. It's very, very hot in Paraguay. And we were sitting in the shade in their little house. They just have little mud houses. And I was sitting with them, and we're chatting. And all of a sudden, a Jeep drove up in front of the house. And there are no Jeeps there. This is people have horses and mules, perhaps, if they're lucky. And a woman got out of the Jeep. It looked like a government vehicle, and walked to the front gate and knocked on the door, which in Paraguay means you clap and people say, come in. And she walked in and asked for the head of the household, and I quickly removed myself because it's always really awkward to be a foreigner and have another foreigner show up. She was a fluent Spanish speaker, so it was not somebody from Paraguay. And to make a long story short, I sat about 15 feet away with the kids and listened to her interview the farmer and asking about how much acreage of this were planted, what they ate, how many hectares of land they had, all those kinds of things that we often ask as researchers. And this was a family I knew well, and humble and wonderful, and I loved them because they were always so honest and upfront. And I listened to this man tell lie after lie after lie. Nothing he told her was the truth. Nothing. From the number of hectares to what they ate for lunch to how many children he had. He lied. There were 3 children sitting next to me. He heard that he had 2. Okay? So I was 23, and I was really struck, and I was very confused by this. I'm going to jump forward another decade. I was working in the Brazilian Amazon, and again, I was living in an area called Rio Branco, and I was the only foreigner in the region, basically, and one of the CJR centers stopped in. ICRAF, for those of you who may know it, the International Center for Agroforestry Research. It's now been combined with CIFOR. Anyway, my name had been given to someone because there was a big international project. It was called Alternatives to Slash and Burn, and this area of the Amazon had been selected as one of the places for that project. This was about change. This was about trying to change behavior in terms of slash and burn agriculture. It was the nascent beginnings of recognizing the issues of climate change and deforestation and those kinds of things. And I'm not going to tell you too much about the story, except that my job was to help put them in contact with local NGOs and government officials and help them set up field work and all of that. These were wonderful people. In graduate school, I had read some of their work, so it was very intimidating. And it was a really beautifully thought out project. Really well, down to the detail thought out, and it completely failed. An absolute disaster. And it failed because they didn't know how to develop relationships. Good people, these were not bad people. They assumed that because some of them spoke Spanish, which is similar to Portuguese, that they would just speak Spanish to people. They assumed that when they met someone who did not look like a high enough official, that they should only talk to the person above that. They stayed in the fanciest hotel in town, which wasn't very fancy, and ate in the fanciest restaurant in town, which wasn't very fancy, but people noticed all these things, and I suspect that all of you recognize these kinds of things. And a project that really had tremendous potential with a lot of money behind it, a lot of energy, it failed completely. And I was stunned and horrified by watching that. That's what got me into the work that I do today. So those are the 2 quick stories to set things up. And what was the lesson that I learned about that? And I just like this little comic, these birds sitting in a tree saying, I'm tired of doing everything as a group, I'd be better alone, and the other looks out, and this is kind of me preaching, I think, but think of all the beautiful things we can accomplish together. I could work better alone. And if any of you work at universities or in governments or in research, even when we want to work together, there's this overwhelming, if I could just have one day to do things by myself, I would be okay. I have seen this again and again and again and again and again. Collaboration is difficult. Working together is difficult, and it's getting more complex by the day. You saw Paul's little multi-scale system of looking at the world. As we all know, it's way more complicated than that. Right? Things are changing constantly. As you talked about earlier, people are migrating. There are all sorts of changes in borders. There is civil war. There are natural disasters. There are all sorts of things going on, different people involved. And because they're so complex and so many people, we need to really get a lot of people together if we're going to try to figure out how best to approach the challenges that you all are facing and trying to work with and enact behavior change. Again, no one person, no one group can possibly have enough information to design a good project. I'm sorry, you can't. We've got to work together. And collaboration, partnerships require a lot of time, and they require a skill set. We're taught in graduate schools, at least here in the US, no, learn your statistics, learn your agronomy, learn your nutrition, and then go, don't worry, you'll figure that stuff out. That's common sense. That's what we do. Collaboration, those are soft skills. The hard skills are the things you're going to learn in school so that you can go out and do this difficult work. The term hard skills was developed by white male engineers. Soft skills, which refer to collaboration and partnerships and things like that, why do you think they gave it the name soft skills? I'll just let you think about that. So I want to briefly introduce 2 frameworks, very simple, maybe obvious sounding, but extremely powerful once I realized how to use them. And I just want to share them, and you can take what you like and leave what you don't like. I'm going to start with the first one. This comes from a book on working with groups and communities that I very much like, A Facilitator's Guide to Participatory Decision-Making. And they talk in this book about 4 participatory values. This can be for working with a group of women in a village. This can be for working with a group of academics at a university. This can be for working with groups who are representing NGOs and communities and government officials, et cetera, and these simple 4 values are full participation, mutual understanding, inclusive solutions, and shared responsibility. And that sounds like a bad speech from a motivational speaker. Hey, do that. But I want to go through each of these briefly and mention or try to explain why these are so important and powerful in your everyday work. So full participation refers to, in that partnership, in that meeting, that everyone communicates their ideas and feels heard. Lovely, that sounds great, but what does that mean in practice? Some of us have to speak out loud for a long time to organize our thoughts and say what we want. Some of us like to be very quiet, and we have to really collect our thoughts before we speak. Some of us feel intimidated if the person next to us is our boss or somebody considered more important. How can we design a partnership? How can we design a way to talk to each other where everybody can feel heard and you communicate in the way that they feel comfortable? How can we expand what is an acceptable communication style? Because if we don't, in a partnership, it's not going to be as strong a partnership as it could be. Mutual understanding. Okay? Participation, great. Everybody's speaking, all of that, but mutual understanding means that I can look at you and I can actually articulate what your idea is. I don't have to agree with it, but I can actually prove to you that I understand what you're saying. And you can prove to me that you understand what we're saying. In partnerships and collaborations, we often don't take the time to do that. Okay, clearly, here's the budget. Clearly, we've got 3 months. I think we all understand that they're under pressure. Here's what we don't really take the time to work through what those differences and ideas are and make sure that everybody, higher level, lower, whatever, has an understanding. Third, inclusive solutions. When we do have a project or initiative or even a simple decision-making meeting, we want to know that everybody in that group feels like they have a piece in that decision. When we decide we're going to do this project, this is how we're going to do this project, this is when we're going to go out to that place or do this, that everybody in that group of partners feels like they've contributed to that decision. It may be that what they said is, okay, I think this is a bad idea. I just want everybody to know that I think this is a bad idea. I'm willing to go with it, but just as long as that's registered, I'm good. Even at that level, it's vital to have inclusive solutions, because if everybody in that partnership or group feels like they can see themselves in that activity, it's going to go a lot better. It's not going to be like that project that I described in Brazil. And finally, shared responsibility, which is linked to inclusive solutions. Everybody feels like they're responsible for what happens. Even if I'm not the one in charge, I feel connected. I feel, okay, I'm going to support this because I feel like I have a piece of that. It's simple, but it's rather profound. And in our busy, busy, busy lives with so much to do, it's really hard to stop and think, is everybody really, have we heard from everybody? Does everybody feel heard? Does everybody understand what everybody else is saying? Does this solution seem, do you see yourself in the solution? Does everybody feel like they're responsible for this partnership? Partnerships fail, collaborations flail when people don't have the time to pay attention to these things, which I'm sorry are just important as any statistical analysis that you do. The second framework that I want to introduce you to is called the triangle of needs and interest, and these kind of intersect a little bit. And this is not a great slide, I apologize, but a gentleman named Christopher Moore, he was a professor, a researcher. Anyway, he is a very well-known mediator. So he works with conflict. And for 20 or 30 years, he'd been working with conflicts, everything from the 2 gentlemen here, our neighbors, and one builds a fence between the properties, and you think the fence is too far on your side, and he's on your property, and there's a fight. That kind of mediation, all the way up to international conflict. And he had been working with the frameworks that we use for a long time. Okay, the key thing to do in any conflict, any partnership, is to find out why people want things or why not. Once we know the why or why not, then we can negotiate and figure this out. But he noticed there was something missing in that. And what he noticed when he analyzed over 5,000 cases was that, there are really 3 different kinds of interests that human beings find important. And this is across cultures. We may use different words. One is that idea of substantive issues, and I'll get to that in a minute. One is procedural issues, the process of how we make decisions or do things. And the third is what he called the psychological, which is really confusing, but it's how people feel like they're being treated. And what he found was that in any negotiation, whether it was to collaborate or because there was a conflict, paying attention to all 3 sides of that triangle made an enormous difference in working through problems and in coming up with better partnerships and solutions. Let's review these very briefly. Substantive needs and interests. So think of things like your budget, financial resources. Think of things like who's going to be responsible for what. Think of things like how much information do we have, who has that information. Things like time frames and infrastructure, all those substantive things that we can almost take a picture of, that we usually think about when we think about partnerships and collaboration. These are things we got to talk about. Okay, how about the budget? What's the timeline? Who's going to do what? Substantive issues, very, very important. And the questions that he and I and others encourage us to ask ourselves are, do we really know what the issues, opportunities are from everybody's viewpoint? That sound familiar from the last slide of mutual understanding? Do I know what people want out of this discussion or initiative or partnership and why? Similar to that last slide, people often have multiple needs and interests. We tend to focus on the substantive ones, which is good. They're vital, but they're not the only ones. The second one is process. It really makes a difference to us as human beings whether we think something has been fair or not. When we don't feel that a process for making a decision has been fair, when we don't feel like a process for deciding who has what responsibility is fair, when we don't feel like we've talked about it, even though to me it seems perfectly fair. I mean, I read a paper that said this is how you do it and it's fair. If you don't think it's fair, you're going to be angry. And I can't tell you how many mediations I've been in and or how many projects I've been in where people are at odds, fighting, and finally someone says, I'm sorry, you were wrong on that, but I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been like that. And the person says, okay, now you apologize, we can move forward. Process matters. People want to feel like their needs are recognized in the process for decision making and for partnerships is clear. That make sense? The final part I sort of dived into by accident a little bit, but has to do with respect. And this is sometimes the hardest one for all of us to deal with. So I may have my substantive needs met. I may feel like that this partnership or this project has a good process. It's pretty fair. We're dividing everything up well. But if I feel like I'm being condescended to, if I feel like I'm not really respected, I'm just being used, if I feel like I've lost face or been embarrassed, it's not going to go well. And most of the time this happens not because people are bad people, but because it's really hard. We haven't taken the time to think about this. I mean, do I really know how other people feel about this project? I mean, I think I do, but do I really? How can I find out? Do people really feel like they've been listened to? I mean, everyone went in the circle, everybody gave their opinion, so clearly they must feel like they've been listened to. Do I know how they really want to be treated, how they feel like they're being treated? Do they feel good about this relationship, or is it just transactional? Yeah, good, they're bringing in some money, so I'll help you, but I'm not really into it. And some of the questions that I encourage us to ask ourselves have to do with, am I inadvertently using language that can be offensive, that sounds like it's blaming, that sounds like it conveys arrogance, even if I'm not intending to? And I suspect that all of you have experienced this, right? Am I ignoring or marginalizing anyone because I haven't noticed? We talked a lot about gender earlier, and there's no need to talk about or remind everybody of how often women are overlooked, but people in different castes are overlooked, people who are of different power structures, people just sitting at the side of the room are overlooked. And we can't be perfect at this, but are we really recognizing and including all the actors we need to in a way that they feel comfortable? And of course, am I cognizant of power differences? Just look at me now. I'm an old white guy. I'm wearing a suit. I'm standing on a podium. I have glasses on. You told you I was a professor. That suggests this whole list of reasons why people might be afraid to talk to me, or why I might not realize that people are afraid to tell me the truth. It's hard to recognize those kind of relationships. So finally, am I truly open to learning? Because all these things take time and effort, and they're not just normal common sense. We have to work at them. So I have 3 comics up here, which you may or may not be able to see. I want you to concentrate on the middle one, which I'll read off in case you can't see it. The one on the left of the fish in the glass, and one saying, "Oh, this is great," and the other one saying, "I can't breathe." Sadie's going to tell us more about that kind of thing. The one on the right, where there are 2 people talking to each other, one presenting and one listening, and each is thinking, "This idiot can't understand or explain anything." Sadie's going to get at that a little bit as well in hers. But I want to talk about the middle one briefly, where there are 2 people walking along, and this comic is intended rightfully to go after men, but it has a broader appeal. And in it, the woman is, or the man is saying, "On the contrary, a person has to listen very carefully to hear only what he wants to hear." And that is funny when we think about some of our relationships. And what I want to do is to bring it back to all of us. And what I have seen, and you can find YouTube videos and TED Talks and things about this, when we have a project or initiative or a passion about something, and we bring people together, either a focus group or a community meeting, and we want to find out how we can make this work, how this can be a better idea. We're listening for how we can make this work and how we can make this a better idea, without listening for whether people are actually really interested in it or not. And in the tech world, there are all sorts of wonderful examples of people coming up with wonderful technological innovations and bringing together focus groups. And a couple of years later, after the thing completely flopped, going back and watching those focus groups and seeing that people were really trying to tell those who were doing the facilitating, this is a stupid idea. I mean, you could improve it this way, but this is a stupid, you could improve it this way. Nobody wants to do that. It's an easy trap to fall into. So I want to just throw out those few provocations to you. And again, I suspect that none of it is really new to you, and hopefully some was interesting. But think about in your meetings, think about in your work with communities, think about when you work with partnerships, whether you are the one leading the partnership or part of it. Are you finding that there's mutual understanding? Are you finding that people really are participating in a way that they feel okay with? Do people feel like they're part of the solution, they can see themselves in that project? And when you interact with other people, are you dealing with just the substantive issues? Are you thinking about, too, whether people are feeling respected and listened to? And are we thinking about whether the process is fair? Not from my point of view, but from everyone's point of view. Thank you very much.